Alright, so if you want to learn how to edit in VSDC, keep watching because you might learn how to edit something like this. Welcome back. So first off, huge shout out to VSDC for sponsoring this video. And stick around because we have some pretty exciting news to share. But nonetheless, VSDC. What is it and how do you use it? Well, it's a free video editing software, pretty obvious, but they have a pro version with more access to advanced features. However, the free version has everything you need, so links to both will be in the description. Now, let's get started. For today's tutorial, we will go through the process of editing a montage style video, just like the one that you saw. When you first open VSDC for the first time, you have a simple homepage where it greets you with many options, including a brief overview of all the features it offers. You can also choose to open a project or start a new one and customize all the properties of your video as well, which we will be doing today. Now, as you can see, we have ourselves the main page where we will start to edit. The first panel in front of us is the Projects Explorer, which will contain all of your projects and scenes depending on how many projects you're working on, which today will only be one. And if we switch tabs down below, we have the template window, which is a collection of all the effects for your video and audio clips. We also have an objects window where you can find all your objects as well. Moving on from that, we can see the preview window, which will allow us to see all the edits that we make. However, it's surrounded by all these tabs full of tools, which we will use later on. But they basically allow you to add certain elements like images, shapes, and text, and the tools here will allow you to adjust them in the preview window. The controls down here are just to see your playback features like pause or play to see your video. Besides that, there are also other important windows such as the properties window, which will allow you to see the properties of your video clips and adjust those settings such as the speed, duration, and volume properties. If we change the tab down here, now we have the resources window, which will contain all of your video and audio clips once you import them in. The last window is the basic effects window, which lets you add any filters and manipulate the look of your video. Finally, we have our timeline, where most of the work in making this video will take place. You can also explore each tab that's located in the top ribbon of the editing program. These tabs are basically the same tools that I just went over, with the exception of this Tools tab, which gives you access to a screen recorder and other tools as well. However, each tab holds a specific set of tools that will help you with the process of editing a video. Now let's import your clips. There are two ways to do this. You can either right-click and import your files, or you can open your folder and drag them in. Alright, so now that we have imported all our video and audio clips onto VSDC, all we have to do is just select one and drag it down to the timeline. So for this one, just select a clip, drag it down to the timeline, and you're going to have two options, add as video or add as audio. For this case, it's just a video clip, so I'm going to choose video. And from there, you can see that the video clip in general has been added to the track, or in this case, layers. That's how they're called in VSDC. And we can just mess with it. You can hit play to preview your track and just select it so you can see all the information. But that's basically how it's going to look every time you add some sort of video or audio track. And the cool thing about VSDC is that you can add as many layers as you want, which will contain both your audio and video clips, and you can just move them around. You can place them wherever, depending on how you want to stack it in your timeline. But there's one thing I did want to mention, and that's the tools that each layer can give you, so we're just going to go through them real quick. So the first feature that I did want to show you is the lock track. So if you just click on this little icon right here, that will basically lock the entire track, so you won't be able to affect it or manipulate it or just move any of the track's entirety. This is super helpful when you're editing a larger project. The icon right beside it is the mute track. It looks like a little eye icon. And if you select that, you're basically going to mute your track so you won't be able to see it. And as you can see here, the only track that we can see is the one right underneath it. However, if I do turn it back on, we will be able to see the original video clip, depending on where the eye marker is on the timeline. So we also have more additional settings like this little waveform icon, which will give you some options when it comes to the audio of your video clips. And finally, we have another way to access all our effects and tools for each layer. So now I'm just going to go back to the timeline and I'm just going to rearrange these clips so they're right beside each other, and feel free to do the same thing. Now that I'm done with that, I have both clips side by side on the same layer. Now there's a few things that I did want to share with you, and that's the fact that you can change the size of each layer just by simply going right underneath it or right above it if you have multiple layers, until you get this little cursor, and you're going to be able to change the size of the track depending on what you want to see on your timeline when you're editing. For me, I just like putting it as small as possible, but you of course can change the size and dimensions of each layer. Now the next thing that we're going to be going over is how to split and trim a video. Now for now I'm just going to separate these two clips so we can just focus on one. Now the process is super simple. In order to trim a video clip, all you have to do is just go to one end of the video clip, and then your cursor should change to something like this, and then you can just drag in and do the same thing to the opposite side of the video clip. And that's how basically you can trim your video to an exact length, or just to make it shorter in general. But if you want to restore it or even make it longer, all you have to do is do the same thing. Go to each end and just drag it out depending on how long you want your clip to be. However, if you go to the top ribbon in the editor tab, you'll see that you'll have certain tools for cutting and splitting a video clip. If we press on this little option, we have a dedicated cutting and splitting window. However, most of the time that's not really needed. One simple way to split your video is you want to make sure you have your video clip selected and just move your eye marker to wherever you want it positioned on your video clip, and just click on the split tool button that you can find up here, and your clip should split automatically. Now I'm just going to click off and then click on the section that I split and just hit delete on my keyboard so I can get rid of that footage. However, there is another way to split your video. Now I'm just going to let it play for a little bit, and I'm just going to let the eye marker rest right there. And in order to split, I'm just going to use Ctrl K to split, and it does the action, and I can just get rid of the leftover footage. And that is essentially some of the tools that you'll need to start editing. Now before I add the rest of the clips, just one helpful hint. You can actually change the sizes of each of the panels just by going to the outer edges, and until you get this little cursor, you'll be able to stretch it out by dragging in or out and adjusting the sizes, just in case if you need a little bit more space. Besides that, we're ready to bring all our video clips onto the timeline so we can see what we're working with. Now, as you can see, I'm just clicking and dragging all my clips onto the timeline, and I'm just going to try to put them in order in individual layers so that I can see and visualize the outline of the video itself and how it's going to progress. So as you can see, I finished adding all of my footage, and I adjusted the size of each layer to the way of my liking, and I basically have an overview of all of my footage that I'm going to be working with, and now I can just put these video clips in order in one single layer. Now in order for me not to get distracted by all these video clips, what I'm going to be doing is actually muting each layer by deselecting the eye icon so I can see my first layer when I'm actually composing the video. So for now, I'm just going through each layer and selecting the video clips so I can condense it down to one layer and basically have my whole video on it. And you can do the same thing. Alright, so now that I got the clips in order, it's time to actually start editing them and crafting the story. But first, I want to show you how you guys can disable any audio in your video clips. So the way to remove audio is by simply selecting on your video clip, right clicking, and going to audio effects. From there, you just want to go to amplitude and select on silence. Then you'll be taken to a different timeline, and then you're going to have this little box open up. And just make sure that you stick with the default settings. And if yours doesn't match mine, well, you can pause the video right here. Once you got that, all you have to do is hit OK, and the effect has been applied. So this new timeline is basically like the effects timeline that's applied to the clip that you have chosen. So since we choose our first clip, this new timeline has opened in which we're going to add all of the effects to. So in order to go back to the original timeline, all we have to do is just go back to scene 0, and we have all our clips like before. Now that that video clip is muted, all I'm going to do is just remove all the spaces of each clip so we don't have any weird gaps, and I'll also do some splitting and trimming of some clips if they're a little bit too long, which you can do the same thing. Now as you can see, I have the final layout. Now of course I am going to adjust a few things depending on all the other edits that we're going to be making. Now we can start adding transitions into our video. Now the first thing that you want to do is to find a good spot between two clips that you want to add a specific transition to. So for example, I have picked these two clips, as you can see right here. Now there's different ways to add a transition in VSDC. One of the most common ways is by selecting the clip that you want to add the transition to and just go to the template window tab and go to transition collection. As you can see, there's a variety of different transitions that you can use and you can go and check every single one of them. However, there is another way to add a transition. All you have to do is just select on your clip, right click, go to video effects, and go to the transition drop down menu. And as you can see, you will have the same selection of transitions as well. Now for today's video, I am going to show you how to do a slider push transition with added motion blur. It's actually really simple to do in VSDC, and it follows the same general process for any other transitions as well. Now we're just going to go back to our video clip and we're going to select it, right click, video effects, transitions, and we're going to use the push transition. Now you will also have the same menu pop up and you want to make sure that it's selected to the end of scene because this is a transition from a first clip to a second clip. And as you can see, a new layer has opened which contains our transition element, and I can just move the eye marker so I can show you where the transition is going towards. In this case, it's pushing out to the left side. Now if we select on the transition and go to the properties window, you will also see the settings for this type of effect. So as you can see, the mode is right to left, and right underneath it, I'm just going to leave it at false. And as you can see, we have other settings that makes this transition possible. However, remember that with any transition, it comes with its own settings that you must adjust later on. But if you're trying to get this type of transition, here are the settings for you. Now you can also go to the transition element and trim it as well, just in case if you want your transition to be longer or even shorter, you can always adjust it like so. Now that we got the specific transition for that clip, there's still one more thing that we have to add, which is the motion blur. We're just going to go back to our video clip and we're going to right click, video effects, and for this one, we want to go to filters and select motion blur. As you can see, it will take us back to the different timeline and the same menu option would pop up, and you want to make sure it will appear at the end of the scene. It instantly adds a new layer on top of our transition and it adds the motion blur effect to it. Now like always, you can go to the properties window and adjust the blur settings. Now take a note, in the blur distances, I have the value set to 0 all the way to 300. And this is because I want it to fade in or have a slight progression as it gets more blurrier. And this is key because most of your effects will depend on adding values such as this one. Now you can always view how your effects and transitions will appear, but sometimes with too many added effects, the preview may lag. And one possible fix is just by going to the resolution of your preview, and it will have a specific drop down menu in which you can select the resolution of your preview screen if it keeps lagging too much, which hopefully will help. And that's essentially the process to add this type of transition. Now all we have to do is add it to our second clip, and it's pretty much the same process with a few different settings. So we're just going to go back to our timeline and we're going to select on the second video clip. And you know the process. Go to video effects, transitions, and add a push transition. The only difference that you have to change from this menu option is choose from the start of scene and then hit OK. And as you can see, the new transition will appear right then and there. We can see that some of the settings have been slightly altered. This will include the mode, which is left to right, and the directly, which is true. And like before, we can trim the transition either to make it faster or just make it longer and slower, and you can just preview it just in case if you want to make any changes. But you know what comes next. We're going to go back to our video clip and add the motion blur filter. And of course, move it to start from the scene, and it should be applied automatically. Like always, you can always match these settings when it comes to the motion blur, but this is how simple it is to make a sliding or pushing transition. Now if we preview it in the main timeline, you can see that we will have an empty dark space. Now to fix that, we have to do some adjustments. Now what I'm basically going to do is select my second clip and then drag it just right underneath my first clip. And I'm just going to adjust it until the transition starts from my first clip so that my second clip right underneath it, acting as a second layer to my first video, can occupy that blank space so that the transition may flow smoothly. Now as a result from that, we're also leaving other blank spaces behind that video clip. Now one easy solution is to actually elongate that clip that we have trimmed in the first place and just make it a little bit longer so it covers all those blank spaces. And from there is just going to be a lot of fine tuning and previewing the transition in general. Now I'm going to show you one last transition. However, this flows right into my next point, which is adding overlays. Now right now we're going to add an overlay transition, meaning it's going to be the same process as if you were adding an image overlay or a video overlay. It's going to be the exact same process. So like always, we're just going to choose a good spot in between two clips. Now this transition in general is going to be a like leak transition, which is a video file that I have already imported. So I'm just going to go get that file and drag it into the timeline. I made sure I dragged it on top of my current video clip, because that way it's going to open a new layer or video track, so that way it could become an overlay asset. Now this transition is pretty straightforward. All we have to do is just drag it and just place it at the exact same moment where the transition covers up most of the screen, so you don't see the two separate cuts in between both of the clips. But it's just going to require a lot of timing, so I can cover that switch in between those two clips, acting as a transition. Now as you can see, I'm going to trim the end of the transition right here, but I also want to add some sort of fade or transparency fade to it, so I can cut the transition a little bit shorter without making it too drastic. Now to do this, I'm just going to right click, go to video effects and choose transparency. From there I can choose custom transparency and switch this menu option to the end of scene. Now this will allow me to create a transparent fade instead of a fade with black, which will just ruin the transition, so I'm just going to use a transparent fade out. I'm going to select on the element and adjust the transparency values, and as you can see, I can go back and adjust it and see the differences with the transparency effect and without it. And that's pretty much how you guys can add different transition types in VSDC, but let's get into even more effects that you can add to the video. Now adding text in your video is a really important skill to know, and good thing that VSDC makes this process really simple to do. For this example, I want to use the text at the end of my video for a call to action message. Now the first thing you want to do is place the eye marker where you want to place the text. From there we're going to go switch to the editor tab, because that's where all your tools are going to be located. After that, just make sure you have everything in place, and then we're going to go to the sidebar here beside the preview window and select on the text tool. From there, your cursor should change to something like this, and now you can actually draw a text box on the video frame itself. You can instantly see a new layer in your timeline with the text asset already in it. Now you can go to the text box and type whatever you want to say. From there, we can go to the editor tab and you can see all the controls that it gives you in regards to the size, type of font, and other really helpful settings. Now remember, you can explore all these settings like I'm doing now, so I can have my text exactly as I want it. Now the final touches of your text is actually aligning it. Depending on where it is in your video frame, I just want to align it straight into the middle, and I'm just going to use the adjustment settings so I can just have it right in the middle of the text box. And then with this selector tool, you can select on the text and move it around inside the video frame. But if you're not too sure where the middle is or wherever you want to place it, you also have these tools right here, which will accurately position the text box depending on where you want to have it in your video. From here, I'm just going to do some simple adjustments. I'm going to go to the timeline and I'm just going to drag out the text to where I want it to start and add other effects such as a fade in. Simply go to video effects, transparency, and add a fade in. And there we have it, a simple way to add text into your video. And as you can see, I have already adjusted my text element and all the effects I wanted to add. Now the effect I'm going to show you how to add is a zoom in. Now this effect can be applied in many ways depending on how you want to use it. But for this video, I was thinking of adding a really subtle and slow zoom in to the last clip of the video. So we're just going to right click on the video clip, go to video effects, and then go to the transform option and choose the zoom effect. Now for this menu option, you want to make sure you want to add it to the whole video. So I'm just going to use this selection, and the effect has been applied to the whole video clip in its entirety. It gives a really subtle zoom in. However, you may notice that the video itself is going outside of the borders of the frame, but that's there as a reference to you to see how much it's going to zoom in, so you don't really have to worry about that. Now when I applied this zoom in effect, I already have all my settings pre-selected with the linear option applied. Now if I were to change these settings to default, it would just remove the entire zoom in. So it's really important to know how much and how fast you want your video to zoom in and which parameters you want to set it to. So for example, you can copy these settings exactly and it should have that really subtle zoom in effect. but you can always decrease your values if you want a slower zoom in or increase them if you want a faster zoom in. But make sure you're using the linear parameters, which is the little icon beside each value section. Now that we applied that, I want to make sure that I move the zoom in effect underneath the fade out effect, just to make sure it doesn't affect it in any way. And that is the process that you can create a zoom in. Now if you want to zoom out, you just insert the opposite set of parameters and values, but it's pretty straightforward. Now it's time to add music to our video. Now this is a process for any audio files that you may be adding to your video, either if it's music, a voiceover, or even sound effects. Now as you can see, I have a variety of audio files, but I'm just going to choose my background music. And I'm just going to drag it onto the timeline right underneath all my video clips. And as you can see, it's pretty long, so I'm just going to adjust it right to the beginning, and I'll just have to trim it to the exact size that I want to leave it at. Now you can just hit play to preview your sound and check the audio volumes, but if it's a bit too loud, especially if you're adding a voiceover, it's really important that you check that audio volume. So what you want to do is select on your audio clip, go to properties window, and you'll have all the audio settings right there. Then you can go to the audio volume and it will just give you a slider depending on how many decibels you want to decrease it or increase it by. But since it's just background music and no voiceover, I'm just going to decrease it slightly. However, I do want to add some fade in and fade out to this audio track, and it's the same process as it is in the video. So you want to select it, right click, and this time go to audio effects. Go to amplitude, and then we can choose either fade in or fade out. In this case, I'm going to choose fade in and hit OK. And like always, you can always adjust the duration of the fade in, but we can go back and do the same thing to add our fade out. And by going back, we can adjust the length of the audio track and even adjust the filters. Next, I want to show you how you guys can add sound effects, and it's basically the same process. Depending on what effect or sound effect you want to use for your video, you can just drag it and drop it down to your timeline. In this case, I want to open a new layer on top of my background music so I can have my sound effects right on top of it. And I'm just going to trim it and change the location of it depending on where I want to place it. Now this particular sound effect, I do want to match with the overlay transition that I added and change some of the values as well, just so it's not too loud. And I can do the same thing for the next sound effect. Just drag it in and then just place it wherever I see fit. In this case, I'm going to use this whoosh sound effect for my push in transition, and I can adjust it to my personal preference. And we're finally done editing this video, but now we're in the last stage of this video editing project, which is exporting. Now VSDC makes this process pretty straightforward. All you have to do is just select on the export project tab that's found up here, and then it will take you to a new page where you can see all the information of your video and audio tracks and the different types of export files that VSDC supports. You can also choose to preview your video before you export it, but this is the page in general. Now what you want to do is go to the output files. From here you can choose to change the name of your project and the location in which you want it to save it and export it. You also have options to change the profile, but I would just go with the default and as well as the quality of the video. But you can always choose to edit your profile by clicking on this button right here, and a menu of options should appear, all of which you can leave at default because VSDC renders your video depending on its specific settings. But if you're happy with all the settings, all you have to do is just click on the export project button. And the rendering process should start, and it should be exported as an AVI file for you to see once it stops rendering. And there you have it, a full yet simple guide to all the basic tools and features that you can use to make your own videos. Now for that special announcement. I have partnered up with the VSDC team to start a new tutorial series where I'll make tutorials based on all your suggestions and new updates that come to VSDC. It will follow the same format as most of my videos, nothing too different. Now I'm still going to continue making the other series and videos, but a little variety is not too bad. So let me know if you have any questions or suggestions. But that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoyed, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.